There is a document, somewhere in the Imperium of Man, that grants the person who holds it the right to do almost anything. Not some things. Almost anything. The document is written on materials that no ordinary scribe has access to. It bears seals that no ordinary authority can duplicate. It is, in its purest form, a slip of ancient parchment that carries on its surface the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of legal precedent, and when it is produced in the correct setting, in front of the correct officials, it compels those officials to step aside. Imperial Guard commanders step aside, planetary governors step aside, inquisitors on occasion step aside, though the Inquisition does not like it and does not forget it. The document permits its holder to cross the borders of the Imperium and enter territory that no sanctioned Imperial citizen is supposed to enter. It permits its holder to trade with Xenos species that any other Imperial subject would be burned alive for speaking to. It permits its holder to command fleets, wage wars, negotiate treaties, found colonies, claim worlds, and when necessary, raise them. It is the only document of its kind in the entire Imperial legal system. It is called a Warrant of Trade, and the person who holds it is called a rogue trader. This is the story of that document, of the people who carry it, of the dynasties they have built, and the empires they have carved out of the galaxy's darker edges, and of what it means to exist within the Imperium as something that is not quite Imperial. The Rogue Trader is one of the most peculiar institutions in all of Warhammer 40,000, and I want to try, across the course of this video, to explain why. Not just what a Rogue Trader does, what a Rogue Trader represents. Because the answer to that question, the deeper I go into it, becomes less of a simple lore explanation and more of a mirror held up to the Imperium itself. The Rogue Trader shows you what the Imperium is by showing you the exception it had to carve out of itself in order to survive. Welcome back to Heretical Lore. Today we are going all the way out past the frontier, past the last Imperial Navy patrol, past the cold stars where the Emperor's light grows faint and the Astronomicon becomes a rumor rather than a guide. We are going to the places where the Warrant of Trade is the only law that matters, and the only law that matters is written on a piece of paper whose original signatory has been dead for 10,000 years. Put on something warm. We are going to be out there for a while. The origin of the Rogue Trader institution is, as with so many things in the Imperium, tangled up with the figure of the Emperor himself, and it predates the catastrophe that the Imperium now calls the Horus Heresy by a span of decades. During the Great Crusade, when the Emperor and his Primarchs were reclaiming the scattered human worlds of the galaxy and binding them back into a single dominion, the Emperor recognized that the military conquest of space was only ever going to be one part of the larger project. A Crusade fleet could take a world. A Space Marine Legion could pacify a population. But what came after conquest? The long, slow work of integration, of trade, of resource extraction, of establishing what kind of relationship a newly discovered world would have with the Imperium that had just found it, was a task that required a different kind of agent. Not a soldier, not a priest. Someone who could negotiate, explore, improvise, and above all, someone who could be trusted to represent the Emperor's interests in regions that the Emperor's formal institutions had not yet reached. My interpretation of this foundational decision, and it is one that I think informs everything about how the Rogue Trader institution developed, is that the Emperor was being honest with himself about the limits of what a centralized bureaucracy could accomplish. He was a pragmatist. He knew, before most of his advisors knew, that the Imperium was going to grow too large for any single hand to administer. He knew that there would always be frontiers beyond the frontiers, edges beyond the edges, and that If the Imperium was going to maintain any influence in those regions at all, it would have to delegate. It would have to trust individuals. It would have to grant those individuals authority that under ordinary circumstances no Imperial citizen would ever be permitted to hold, because the circumstances at the edge of the galaxy were not ordinary, and ordinary tools would not work there. During the Crusade era, these individuals carried a specific title. They were called Rogue Traders Militant, and they held the rank of Lord Captain, a rank bestowed by the Emperor himself upon those who had proved worthy of the responsibility. The Rogue Traders Militant operated as outriders of the expeditionary fleets, ranging ahead of the main crusade, scouting, fighting, negotiating, and claiming whatever could be claimed. They did not expect rescue if they encountered foes beyond their strength. Their fleets were often ramshackle, patched together from captured vessels, including Xenos vessels of strange and esoteric form. They were expected to be resourceful in ways that conventional military commanders were not expected to be resourceful, and the ones who survived long enough to establish dynasties were the ones whose resourcefulness was equal to the conditions they faced. The title Rogue Trader Militant fell out of use after the heresy, when the conditions that had produced it no longer applied, but the rank of Lord Captain survived, and the holders of ancient warrants still carry it to this day, often as the formal address used by their households and by the officials of Imperial courts who have learned what the title means and what responding to it incorrectly can cost. The Warrant of Trade, then, was the answer. A document that functioned as a kind of portable sovereignty. The holder of a warrant was granted by the Emperor's own hand in the earliest cases, or by a Primarch or senior Crusade commander acting in the Emperor's name, the authority to act as the Emperor would act in his absence. Within the scope of the warrant's terms, which varied from warrant to warrant and were often deliberately vague, the Rogue Trader could do almost anything. The Rogue Trader could raise armies, command ships, treat with alien species, establish colonies, execute criminals, promote officers, mint currency, declare war, negotiate peace, and generally behave like a minor monarch operating across interstellar distances. The price of this authority was a kind of exile. The Rogue Trader was expected to operate at the edges, to push outward, to find and claim whatever could be found and claimed, and to bring wealth back to the Imperium in whatever form the Rogue Trader could manage. The Rogue Trader was not supposed to linger in the settled parts of the galaxy. The Rogue Trader was a frontier creature, and the frontier was where the warrant had its fullest effect. The specific powers granted by a Warrant of Trade are worth describing in some detail, because they are genuinely extraordinary, and they do not correspond to any other set of powers held by any other Imperial institution. A Rogue Trader has the authority to cross the borders of the Imperium at will. This alone is significant. The Imperium is, for almost all of its citizens, a closed system. You are born on an Imperial world, you live on an Imperial world, you die on an Imperial world, and if you happen to travel between Imperial worlds, you do so under the careful supervision of the Imperial authorities who regulate such movement. Leaving the Imperium is not something that ordinary citizens do. Leaving the Imperium is, in most circumstances, a crime. The Warrant of Trade exempts its holder from this rule. The Rogue Trader can leave, can go where no sanctioned authority has gone, can return and can leave again, and no Imperial officer has the standing to stop them. Within this basic freedom of movement, the warrant grants a further set of specific permissions. The Rogue Trader can engage in commerce with Xenos species. This is, under ordinary Imperial law, a capital offense. An Imperial citizen who trades with aliens is a heretic, and the penalty for heresy in most parts of the Imperium is death, usually by fire. A rogue trader, however, may trade with aliens, may sit across the table from them, may shake their appendages if they have appendages to shake, and may come back to an Imperial port with a hold full of alien-manufactured goods, and the Imperial authorities are required by the terms of the warrant to permit this traffic. They do not have to like it. Most of them do not like it, but they are legally bound to tolerate it, within the scope of what the specific warrant authorizes. The rogue trader can claim worlds. This is perhaps the single most consequential power granted by a warrant. If a rogue trader discovers a world, or rediscovers a lost human world, or otherwise establishes a presence on a world that was not previously part of the Imperium, the rogue trader can claim that world in the Emperor's name, and the claim is legally valid. The formal ritual of claiming is itself a piece of Imperial tradition that has been preserved in the archives and is still performed today, on worlds where a rogue trader has set foot for the first time. The words are spoken aloud before witnesses, usually while the rogue trader stands on the surface with the warrant displayed and a banner of the dynasty planted beside them. I claim this world for the Emperor of humanity and his Imperium. I bring justice and truth for the loyal, punishment and death for the guilty. Those are the canonical words, and the utterance of them, in the presence of the warrant and its bearer, is legally sufficient to establish the claim. The world becomes, for the duration of the warrant's terms, a kind of private fief. The rogue trader can exploit it, administer it, tax it, settle it, and defend it, and in most cases the Imperium will eventually recognize the claim and either incorporate the world into the formal Imperial structure or leave it under the rogue trader's control for generations. Many of the worlds currently classified as Imperial colonies in the outer regions began their Imperial history as rogue trader claims, and the descendants of the original rogue trader often still hold significant influence over the world's affairs long after the Imperium has formally absorbed it. The rogue trader can command military force. Not just a personal guard, though the personal guards of established rogue traders are often themselves small armies. The rogue trader can command fleets, can requisition soldiers, can recruit and train troops, and can deploy this force as the rogue trader sees fit, within the scope of the warrant's authority. The scale of this force varies enormously depending on the wealth and prestige of the dynasty. A minor rogue trader might operate with a single ship and a few hundred retainers. A major rogue trader, the head of an ancient and powerful dynasty, might command a battle fleet rivaling that of an entire Imperial Navy sector command, with multiple capital ships, entire regiments of household troops, detachments of space marines on loan from chapters with which the dynasty has cultivated relationships, and a network of client worlds that owe the dynasty their loyalty and their resources. My interpretation of the scale of this power, when you start to really sit with it, is that the rogue trader is functionally a warlord. I do not think there is another honest way to describe it. A major rogue trader operating at the full extent of the authority granted by a venerable warrant is something very close to a head of state in the classical sense. They have territory, they have armies, they have a revenue base, they have subjects, they have the right to conduct foreign policy, to engage in war, to negotiate treaties. The only thing they lack, formally, is the status of a sovereign, and even that is a polite fiction, because in practice the rogue trader is answerable only to the Emperor, and the Emperor has been on the Golden Throne and unable to issue direct instructions to anyone for 10,000 years. The rogue trader answers, in theory, to a dead man's memory. In practice, the rogue trader answers to the rogue trader's own judgment, and that is what makes the institution both extraordinarily useful and extraordinarily dangerous. The hereditary nature of the ancient warrants is one of their most important features, and it is the feature that transforms rogue traders from individuals with unusual authority into dynasties that can span the rise and fall of civilizations. A warrant of trade, in the classical sense of that phrase, is not a document granted to a single person for the duration of that person's life. It is granted to a person and to that person's heirs, and to their heirs after them, in perpetuity, for as long as the warrant remains legally valid and the line holds. This means that a rogue trader dynasty, once established, can persist for centuries or even millennia. The oldest surviving warrants trace their origin back to the Great Crusade itself, which was roughly 10,000 years ago in the current Imperial timeline, and the dynasties that hold those warrants have been operating continuously since then. They have accumulated wealth on a scale that no individual life can match. They have developed institutional knowledge, family traditions, training regimes for their heirs, networks of allies and enemies, and bodies of accumulated experience that make them, in many cases, more effectively powerful than much larger imperial organizations. Not every document granting rogue trader status is a full warrant of trade. Over the millennia, as the Imperium became more bureaucratically cautious about delegating sovereign power, a lesser category of authorizing document emerged. These are called letters of marque, and they are similar in form to warrants, but significantly restricted in scope. A letter of marque might confine its bearer to a single sector, might require more frequent reporting to imperial authorities, might specify permitted and prohibited activities in far greater detail than an ancient warrant ever would. Most significantly, many letters of marque are not hereditary. When the bearer dies, the document is revoked, and any heir who wishes to continue the work must apply for a new authorization from the administratum. The holders of letters of marque are still called rogue traders, and they still carry real authority. But they are not the equals of the ancient dynasties, and they know it, and the ancient dynasties make sure they know it. The distinction between a full hereditary warrant and a restricted modern letter of marque is one of the most important status markers within the broader rogue trader class, and a great deal of internal politics within the community of rogue traders revolves around the jealous preservation of that distinction. I find this feature of the institution particularly fascinating, because it has consequences that I do not think the original founders fully anticipated. A rogue trader dynasty that has been operating for 10,000 years is in effect a kind of living institutional memory that exists outside the formal structures of the Imperium. They remember things. They have records. They have seen things through their ancestors and their accumulated archives that the Imperium itself no longer remembers. Some of the oldest dynasties are rumored to hold documents from the Great Crusade period before the heresy, before the long darkness of the Imperium's collapse into its current form. What those documents contain, and what the dynasties know about the origins of the Imperium that the Imperium itself has forgotten, is not a subject that the dynasties are eager to discuss. But my suspicion, and it is only a suspicion, is that the older rogue trader dynasties know more about the actual history of humanity in this galaxy than any imperial institution currently operating. They just do not see any particular benefit to sharing that knowledge. The typical structure of a rogue trader operation is worth describing, because it has its own internal logic that is different from anything else in the Imperium. At the center of everything is the flagship, the primary vessel of the dynasty, which is almost always an ancient capital-class warship, often older than most Imperial Navy vessels, often modified over the centuries in ways that would horrify a Mechanicus inspector, and always the symbolic heart of the dynasty. The flagship is not merely a ship. It is the rogue trader's capital. It is where the rogue trader lives, where the warrant is kept, where the heirs are raised, where the dynasty's library and its vaults and its chapels are housed. A rogue trader without a flagship is a rogue trader whose dynasty is in trouble. A rogue trader who loses a flagship in combat, to a rival, to a void storm, to a Xenos attack, is a rogue trader who has suffered something more serious than a military defeat. They have lost the physical embodiment of their authority, and rebuilding that authority often takes generations. Around the flagship there is typically a household, and the household of a rogue trader is one of the more peculiar social structures in the Imperium. It is not exactly a crew. It is not exactly a family. It is not exactly a court. It is all of these things at once, compressed into the available space of a starship, and organized in ways that reflect the rogue trader's personal preferences as much as any standard Imperial pattern. The household includes the rogue trader's direct relatives, of course, as the heirs and the cousins and the various blood connections who will inherit various pieces of the dynasty when the time comes. It includes the senior officers of the flagship, the ship's master, the navigator, the astropath, the gun deck commanders, the engine seers on loan from the mechanicus. It includes specialists that the rogue trader has recruited or acquired over the years, Xenos advisors in the cases of dynasties that maintain such relationships, scholars and archivists, and chirurgians and assassins and diplomats, and every other kind of expert whose skills the dynasty might need. It includes the household guard, the personal soldiers of the rogue trader, who are often equipped at a standard that any Imperial Guard regiment would envy, because the rogue trader can afford to equip them that way, and the rogue trader's enemies tend to be the kind of enemies for whom nothing less will suffice. And then there is the wider network. The client worlds and the allied dynasties, and the debt relationships, and the trade agreements that extend out from the household like the roots of a tree, reaching across systems, across sectors, sometimes across subsectors, binding the rogue trader's operations into a web of obligations that the rogue trader maintains through a combination of personal visits, delegated representatives, long-distance communication through astropathic relays, and, when necessary, the application of force. The network is what makes a rogue trader effective. A rogue trader with a flagship and a household but no network is limited to what they can personally reach. A rogue trader with an extensive network can project influence across volumes of space that would be unmanageable for any single ship. The great dynasties have networks that have been cultivated over thousands of years, and the maintenance of those networks is one of the primary responsibilities of any rogue trader who wants the dynasty to continue. The question of where rogue traders actually operate is one that I find interesting, because it gets at something important about how the Imperium understands its own geography. The Imperium is not a contiguous territory. It is a collection of held worlds, connected by warp routes, scattered across a volume of space that contains far more non-Imperial territory than Imperial territory. At the edges of this structure, there are regions that the Imperium has mapped but does not control, regions that it controlled once and has lost, regions that it has never entered, and regions that are so hostile to human life or human passage that no sustained Imperial presence is possible. These are the places where rogue traders tend to be found. The halo stars, that sparse and ancient region at the outer edge of the galactic disk, where stars are few and the spaces between them are cold and empty. The eastern fringe, where the Imperium meets the territory of the Tau Empire and various Xenos powers, and where Imperial authority grows diffuse and negotiable. The Coronis Expanse, that vast and lightly charted region beyond the Calixis sector, which has become in recent centuries a kind of new frontier for rogue trader activity. The far reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, beyond the light of the Astronomicon. The outer ghoul stars, where ancient horrors are said to sleep. The ghost worlds, where no living human has set foot for thousands of years. These are the regions where rogue traders work, where the authority of the warrant is most valuable, and where the things that a rogue trader might find, might trade for, might bring home, are most likely to be worth the risks involved in finding them. The risks are, I want to emphasize, real. A rogue trader who operates in genuinely uncharted regions is not playing a game. The galaxy is full of things that want to kill human beings, and many of those things are happy to kill rogue traders specifically. There are Xenos species in the deep dark that regard the arrival of a human warship as a provocation. There are hulks and derelicts and drifting stations that contain active horrors, daemons bound into the machinery, genestealers in the air recyclers, ancient guardian constructs that wake up when they detect movement. There are warp storms that can strand a ship for centuries of real space-time. There are pirates, mutants, heretics, and rival rogue traders, who are often the worst of the lot because they know exactly what you are carrying and where to look for it. A rogue trader who survives for a generation has been lucky, careful, well-advised, or all three. A rogue trader dynasty that has survived for 1,000 years has accumulated a great deal of luck and a great deal of care, and they have earned their survival at a cost that the outside observer rarely sees. The relationship between the rogue trader and the rest of the Imperium is, and has always been, uneasy. The Imperium depends on the rogue traders for things the Imperium cannot produce internally. Xenos artifacts, lost technologies, information about regions the Imperium does not have the resources to explore. Trade goods from species the Imperium is not in formal contact with. Intelligence about threats gathering beyond the Imperial border. The rogue traders are, in a real sense, the Imperium's eyes and hands at the frontier, and the Imperium cannot function without them. But the Imperium also does not trust them. The Imperium does not like the things they do. The Imperium does not like that they trade with aliens. The Imperium does not like that they operate outside the direct control of any Imperial institution. The Imperium does not like that they hold authority that no other citizen holds, and that this authority is hereditary, and that the oldest of them have been accumulating it for longer than most Imperial institutions have existed. The Inquisition, in particular, has a difficult relationship with the rogue trader class, and I want to spend some time on this because it is one of the more interesting political dynamics in the setting. The Inquisition exists at its core to root out heresy. Trading with Xenos is heresy. Using Xenos technology is heresy. Keeping Xenos advisors aboard your flagship is heresy. Consulting with daemon hosts, or with psychers of unusual kinds, or with heretic artificers, or with any of the dozens of other things that rogue traders routinely do in the course of their ordinary business, are all heresies. An ordinary Imperial citizen who did any of these things would be investigated, tried, and executed, usually within a short period of time. The rogue trader, because of the warrant, is exempt. The Inquisition knows this. The Inquisition does not like it. And the Inquisition, in the way of all bureaucracies that are forced to tolerate exceptions, spends a great deal of time looking for ways to turn those exceptions back into rules. The standard approach is watchfulness. Every rogue trader dynasty of any significance has at least one inquisitor somewhere in the background, maintaining a file, tracking the dynasty's movements, cultivating informants among the household, and waiting for the rogue trader to overstep. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for the day when the rogue trader does something that even the warrant cannot cover, at which point the Inquisition can move in and finally, after decades or centuries of patience, bring the full weight of Imperial authority down on a dynasty that has been a thorn in the Inquisition's side for generations. Sometimes this works. Sometimes the rogue trader does overstep, does make the mistake, and is taken down. More often, it does not work. The rogue trader has been doing this for a long time. The rogue trader has teams of legal advisors whose specific job is to ensure that everything the dynasty does falls within the terms of the warrant. The rogue trader has connections in the administratum, in the ecclesiarchy, in the navy, even in the Inquisition itself, and can usually get advance warning when an investigation is closing in. The stalking dance between the rogue traders and the inquisitors who watch them is one of the slow-burning undercurrents of Imperial politics, and it has been going on for most of Imperial history. My interpretation of this dynamic, because I cannot resist offering one, is that the Inquisition and the rogue traders need each other in a way that neither of them would ever admit. The Inquisition needs the rogue traders to do the things the Inquisition cannot afford to be seen doing. The gathering of Xenos intelligence. The acquisition of forbidden artifacts for study in secure inquisitorial facilities. The contacts with aliens that have to be maintained for strategic reasons but cannot be acknowledged in public. The rogue traders, for their part, need the Inquisition in the sense that they need the Imperium, and the Inquisition is one of the institutions that keeps the Imperium together. A rogue trader in a completely collapsed Imperium is just a warlord with a piece of paper that no one respects. The rogue trader needs the Imperium to be strong enough that the warrant still means something, and the Inquisition is part of what keeps the Imperium strong. So they watch each other, they distrust each other, they undermine each other when they can. And beneath all of this, there is a mutual recognition that both institutions are necessary to the survival of the whole, and that neither of them can afford to win the fight decisively. The Adeptus Mechanicus has its own complicated relationship with the rogue traders, and it is different in character from the Inquisition's. The Mechanicus is interested in technology. The Mechanicus believes at the level of religious conviction that the proper relationship between humanity and technology is one of worship, of ritual, of adherence to the approved patterns established by the Omnissiah. The rogue traders, operating as they do at the edges of human space, routinely encounter technologies that do not fit the approved patterns. Xenos technologies, heretic technologies, lost human technologies from before the Age of Strife, or from the Dark Age of Technology, or from even earlier, that the Mechanicus would give entire fleets to study. The rogue trader has these things. The rogue trader has been collecting them for generations, and the rogue trader knows exactly what they are worth. The result is a commercial relationship that is also a religious problem. The Mechanicus wants what the rogue traders have. The Mechanicus is willing to pay a great deal for it, in coin, in services, in the loaning of engineers and other technical specialists, in the maintenance of ancient ship systems that no one else in the Imperium knows how to repair. The rogue traders are willing to sell, usually, but the negotiations are delicate. Some items the Mechanicus will classify as forbidden once they take possession, and the rogue trader who sold the item may never see it again. Other items the Mechanicus will refuse to acknowledge exist, which is a polite way of saying that the item in question is too dangerous even for Mechanicus study, and the rogue trader would be well advised to destroy it quietly. The great rogue trader dynasties have learned, over the millennia, which categories of acquisition can be sold openly, which can be sold quietly, which can be kept for private use, and which should never be acquired in the first place. The learning has come at a cost, and the cost is paid in the lives of earlier dynasty members who did not know the categories as well as their descendants do. The Astartes, the Space Marines of the various chapters, have the most formally distant but practically intimate relationship with the Rogue Trader class. A Space Marine chapter, as a rule, does not have commercial relationships with anyone. Space Marines are warriors of the Emperor, dedicated to the defense of humanity, and the ordinary transactions of Imperial life are beneath them. But Space Marines also need things, from time to time, that ordinary Imperial supply chains cannot reliably provide. They need transport to regions the Imperial Navy will not enter. They need access to knowledge held in private libraries. They need, occasionally, the kind of deniable operation that a chapter cannot officially authorize but cannot afford to ignore either. The Rogue Traders can provide these things, and the Rogue Traders, for their part, benefit enormously from having a good relationship with a Space Marine chapter. A dynasty that can call on Astartes' support in a crisis is a dynasty that other powers do not lightly provoke. A dynasty that has cultivated such a relationship over centuries, and that treats the chapter with the proper respect, and that has earned the chapter's grudging trust, is a dynasty that has purchased a form of insurance that no amount of void ships and household troops could match. The relationships between specific Rogue Trader dynasties and specific chapters are often long-running, hereditary arrangements that extend across both institutions' memory. A dynasty might have supported a chapter at some critical moment 1,000 years ago, when the chapter was short of transport during a crusade or needed a particular artifact for a particular ritual. The chapter remembers. The chapter's records mark the dynasty as an ally of the chapter in good standing, and when the dynasty calls, the chapter answers, within certain limits and within the terms of whatever original agreement was made. These are not commercial relationships in the ordinary sense. They are something closer to feudal bonds, and they reflect the fact that the Rogue Trader operates in a part of the Imperial political landscape that has more in common with medieval politics than with anything a modern observer would recognize. I want to pause here and offer what I think is the key interpretive insight about the Rogue Trader class, the thing that the basic lore descriptions often miss. The Rogue Trader is not a capitalist. The Rogue Trader is not a merchant in the modern sense of that word. The Rogue Trader is a feudal lord operating in space, and the entire institution makes far more sense when you think of it in those terms. A feudal lord inherits authority from an ancestor who was granted that authority by a sovereign. A feudal lord holds territory, commands troops, administers justice, conducts foreign relations, and answers in theory to the sovereign while in practice acting on their own judgment. A feudal lord passes the position to heirs. A feudal lord enters into alliances and rivalries with other feudal lords, and these alliances and rivalries often last for generations beyond the lifetimes of the original participants. Every part of this description fits the Rogue Trader better than any modern commercial analogy fits. The Warrant of Trade is not a commercial license. It is a patent of nobility. It is the document that establishes once and for all that this particular family is entitled to act as a semi-sovereign power within the Imperial system, and the fact that the family does so by operating starships rather than by sitting in a castle does not change the basic nature of the relationship. This interpretation, I think, explains a great deal about the culture of Rogue Trader dynasties that would otherwise be puzzling. The emphasis on heraldry, for example. Every significant Rogue Trader dynasty has a coat of arms, a motto, a set of symbolic colors, a ritual iconography that is displayed on the dynasty's ships, on the uniforms of its household troops, on the seals of its correspondence, on the walls of the rooms where its leaders hold court. This is not an aesthetic affectation. It is the functional equivalent of the heraldry of terrestrial nobility, and it serves the same purposes. It identifies the dynasty. It asserts the dynasty's claims. It communicates at a glance to anyone who knows how to read the signs, who you are dealing with, and what the history of this house has been. The culture of the dynasties is aristocratic, because the dynasties are, functionally, aristocrats. The fact that their fiefs are measured in light years rather than in acres does not alter the essential structure. The lifestyle of a rogue trader, when observed from the outside, reinforces the aristocratic interpretation in ways that I find both fascinating and a little horrifying. A successful rogue trader lives on their flagship in conditions that no ordinary Imperial citizen could possibly imagine. The private chambers of a major rogue trader are often the size of entire hab blocks from an Imperial hive city. The flagship includes gardens, libraries, private chapels, menageries of exotic creatures, galleries of looted art from a dozen cultures, banquet halls where the rogue trader hosts guests at tables that might seat hundreds, and staff to maintain all of it in numbers that rival the populations of small Imperial towns. The rogue trader dresses in clothing that would bankrupt a planetary governor. The rogue trader eats food that has been shipped across subsectors specifically for the rogue trader's table. The rogue trader holds court, hears petitions, issues judgments, and is treated by the rogue trader's household with a formality that borders on religious veneration. And all of this exists within a ship that is, at the same time, a military vessel, bristling with weapons, crewed by thousands of menials, living in conditions that are essentially indistinguishable from the conditions of any Imperial Navy ship of the line. The contrast is extreme. In the upper decks, the rogue trader holds feasts. In the lower decks, the menials work 16-hour shifts on the gun deck crews, living off nutrient paste and rarely seeing natural light. This is, again, not unlike the arrangement of a feudal estate, where the lord lives in the Great Hall and the peasants live in huts. The difference is only that the feudal estate is a starship, and the peasants are called ratings or armsmen or tech servitors, and the stakes of a bad decision by the lord are higher, because a badly run starship can be lost with all hands to a single mistake, and a feudal estate, at worst, can only be burned down and rebuilt. The question of how rogue traders are made, in the sense of how a new warrant is issued, or how an existing dynasty acquires new members, is one that has changed over the long course of Imperial history. In the earliest days, during the Great Crusade, warrants were issued directly by the Emperor, and the people who received them were in most cases individuals the Emperor knew personally, or who had been recommended to him by advisors he trusted. These original warrants are the most valuable in existence today, because they carry the Emperor's own mark, and because the dynasties descended from them have had 10,000 years to accumulate wealth and influence. After the heresy and the Emperor's confinement to the Golden Throne, the issuance of new warrants fell to the High Lords of Terror, who issue them in the Emperor's name under circumstances that are generally political and occasionally mysterious. A new warrant might be issued to reward a particular service to the Imperium. It might be issued to establish a dynasty that the High Lords believe will be useful in a particular region. It might be issued as part of a compromise between factions, or as a favor called in, or for reasons that are never publicly explained. The holders of new warrants, the dynasties that have only existed for a few centuries rather than for thousands of years, are considered by the old dynasties to be upstarts. The old dynasties do not always cooperate with the new dynasties. The old dynasties sometimes make a point of snubbing them at formal occasions, but the new dynasties are legitimate within the terms of their warrants. And over time, they accumulate their own prestige and their own networks, and eventually, if they last long enough, they become old dynasties themselves, and look down on whichever even newer dynasties the High Lords have since chosen to elevate. The internal succession of a dynasty is a matter that each dynasty handles according to its own traditions, and the traditions vary widely. Some dynasties pass the warrant to the eldest child in a straightforward hereditary line. Some dynasties have systems that involve competition among the heirs, in which candidates must prove themselves through specific achievements before the succession is confirmed. Some dynasties have formal councils of senior family members who vote on the succession when the reigning rogue trader dies. Some dynasties have histories of violent succession disputes in which rival claimants fight each other, sometimes across decades, for control of the flagship and the warrant, and in which the outcomes are decided by force rather than by law. The Imperial authorities, in general, do not intervene in these disputes because the dispute is internal to the dynasty, and the Imperium does not have a clear legal interest in who specifically holds the warrant at any given moment. The Imperium cares that the warrant is held by someone competent and loyal. The specific identity of that someone is a dynastic matter, and the Imperium prefers not to meddle. My interpretation of the succession question, which I think is under-examined in most accounts, is that it is the single greatest source of weakness in the rogue trader institution. A dynasty that has a smooth succession is a dynasty that can continue to function, can maintain its networks, can protect its assets, and can pursue its long-term goals across the generations. A dynasty that has a contested succession is a dynasty that is, for the duration of the contest, vulnerable. The rival claimants are spending their resources on each other. The dynasty's enemies, both internal and external, can take advantage of the distraction. Client worlds can slip out of the dynasty's control. Allies can switch loyalties. Inquisitors can move in on investigations that had previously been blocked by dynasty influence. A contested succession can, in extreme cases, end a dynasty entirely, reducing it in a single generation from a major power to a scattered collection of refugees fighting over a piece of paper that nobody respects anymore. The dynasties that have survived for thousands of years are, in almost every case, dynasties that have worked out reliable succession traditions, and that enforce those traditions ruthlessly. The dynasties that have failed, and there have been many over the long course of Imperial history, have failed most often because they could not solve the succession problem. The cultural legacy of the rogue trader class within the Imperium as a whole is complex and often contradictory. On the one hand, rogue traders are celebrated in Imperial propaganda as heroic figures. They are the explorers, the pioneers, the men and women who venture into the black and bring back the wealth and knowledge that the Imperium needs to survive. Imperial school children on more peaceful worlds learn the names of famous rogue traders in the way that school children on our own history learn the names of famous admirals or generals. Imperial books, both fictional and purportedly historical, tell stories of great rogue trader adventures, in which the dashing captain and her loyal crew battle Xenos horrors, navigate treacherous warp storms, and return triumphantly to Imperial space with treasures that enrich the Emperor's realm. These stories are often exaggerated, sometimes entirely fictional, but they reflect a real cultural admiration for the rogue trader as an archetype. On the other hand, rogue traders are also objects of suspicion, and the suspicion is based on the same features that produce the admiration. The same rogue trader who brings back the Xenos artifact is also the rogue trader who has been talking to Xenos. The same rogue trader who discovered the New World is also the rogue trader who held that world as a private fief for 3 centuries before the Imperium was allowed to formally annex it. The same dynasty that helped win the Great War is also the dynasty that profited enormously from the war, and whose prosperity now makes it a power that the rest of the Imperium has to negotiate with rather than command. The admiration and the suspicion coexist. They are not in tension in the way that a more straightforward moral system might require them to be. The Imperium is not a system that demands moral consistency from its own narratives. The Imperium can admire what it distrusts, and distrust what it admires, and the rogue trader is one of the institutions in which this double vision is most visible. I find this double vision telling, and I think it says something important about the deeper nature of the Imperium. The Imperium is in many ways a society that cannot fully endorse the tools it uses to survive. The rogue trader is a tool the Imperium needs, and the Imperium knows it needs the tool, but the tool is also everything the Imperium has defined itself against. The Imperium is supposed to be unified, and the rogue trader is independent. The Imperium is supposed to be hostile to Xenos, and the rogue trader trades with them. The Imperium is supposed to be governed by its formal institutions, and the rogue trader operates outside them. Every time the Imperium uses a rogue trader, the Imperium is admitting in some small way that its own ideology is not quite sufficient to the conditions it faces. The admission is never spoken. The admission is made in the fact of the warrant itself, which exists precisely because the Imperium needed an exception to its own rules and found that it could not do without one. The future of the rogue trader class in the current state of the Imperium is uncertain in the way that everything in the current state of the Imperium is uncertain. The Great Rift has torn the galaxy in half. The Astronomicon wavers. The Cicatrix Maledictum cuts across ancient warp routes and isolates whole sectors from the core of the Imperium. Many rogue trader dynasties have found themselves on the wrong side of the rift, cut off from their ancestral holdings, their client worlds, their family seats. Some have lost everything. Some have, in the chaos, acquired more than they ever held before, as the collapse of Imperial authority in certain regions has opened opportunities that the dynasties are well positioned to exploit. The rogue traders are, in some ways, better suited than most Imperial institutions to navigate a galaxy in which the central authority has become unreliable. They were always operating at the edges. They were always making decisions for themselves. The rift has not fundamentally changed how they work. It has only changed how much of the galaxy they can reach, and how much of the rest of the Imperium can reach them. My final interpretation, offered with all the usual caveats, is that the rogue trader class will outlast many of the other institutions of the current Imperium. The Imperial Guard will continue to exist, but it depends on centralized logistics that the current Imperium may not be able to sustain. The Imperial Navy will continue to exist, but the fleets are thin, and the losses of the last decade have been severe. The Ecclesiarchy will continue to exist because people need their faith in hard times, but the Ecclesiarchy's reach is constrained by the reach of Imperial authority generally. The rogue traders, by contrast, have always operated as autonomous units. They have their own ships, they have their own troops, they have their own networks. They have been independent for 10,000 years, and the current crisis has, if anything, rewarded their independence. When the Imperium eventually stabilizes into whatever new configuration it is going to stabilize into, or if it does not stabilize and continues to fragment, the rogue traders will still be out there. Their warrants will still be valid, because the legal basis of a warrant does not depend on the day-to-day functioning of any particular Imperial institution. Their ships will still be crossing the stars. Their dynasties will still be passing the authority down from generation to generation. Whatever happens to the Imperium as a whole, the rogue traders are likely to be among the last human institutions to fall, and some of them may well survive the Imperium itself. This is, I think, the thing that makes the rogue trader class such a fascinating element of the setting. They are at the same time deeply Imperial and profoundly not Imperial. They are products of the Imperium's founding vision and embodiments of everything the Imperium had to compromise on in order to make that vision workable. They are the exception that keeps the rule, and they are also the exception that threatens, in the long run, to outlast the rule. A rogue trader holding a warrant signed by the Emperor 10,000 years ago is, in a very real sense, still in direct contact with the founding moment of the Imperium, in a way that no other Imperial citizen living today can claim. The warrant is a living document, renewed every generation by the continuation of the dynasty, and it carries forward a piece of the original Imperial project that the rest of the Imperium has largely forgotten. When I sit with the rogue trader class, what I keep coming back to is that the Emperor, in granting the first warrants, was making a bet. He was betting that there would be enough loyal and capable individuals in the human species that delegated authority could be safely extended to them, and that those individuals could be trusted over the long arc of Imperial history to act roughly in the Imperium's interest, even when no one was watching. It was not a certain bet. It could easily have failed. The Emperor could have issued 100 warrants to people who immediately used them to carve out private kingdoms and secede from the Imperium entirely. The fact that this did not happen, or did not happen often enough to destroy the institution, is itself a remarkable fact about the rogue trader class. Most of the holders of warrants, across 10,000 years, have in fact operated within the spirit of the warrant, even when the letter of the warrant would have allowed them to do far more. They have stayed loyal. They have brought the wealth back. They have returned to Imperial space at the end of their voyages, even when they could have kept going. They have, in their own strange and aristocratic way, remained Imperial. My guess about why this has held is that the rogue traders understand something that the Imperium's more formal institutions sometimes forget. They understand that the Imperium, for all its cruelty and all its absurdity and all its bureaucratic dysfunction, is the only human civilization of significant size left in this galaxy. Everything else is smaller. Everything else is weaker. Everything else, in the long run, will be crushed by the Xenos powers and the warp storms and the ancient horrors and the simple cold indifference of the universe. The rogue traders who have been out there, who have seen what lies beyond the Imperial borders, who have sat across tables from Xenos diplomats and seen the cold gleam in their eyes, know how thin the margin of human survival actually is. They know that the Imperium, whatever its flaws, is the line that humanity has drawn against extinction, and they know that if that line falls, their own warrants, their own dynasties, their own ships and worlds and accumulated treasures will all fall with it. So they stay loyal, they stay Imperial. They remain in their peculiar way the Emperor's servants, even when the Emperor has been silent for 10,000 years. And the Imperium, despite itself, remains grateful, in whatever way the Imperium can be grateful to anything. Somewhere out there, right now, a rogue trader flagship is moving through uncharted space. The bridge is lit by the cold blue of its instruments. The navigator is sealed in the navigation chamber, peering into the warp, guiding the ship along a route that no Imperial chart has ever marked. The rogue trader is in her private chambers, reviewing the latest reports from her household, considering the terms of a deal with a Xenos broker that will either make her dynasty a fortune or end it entirely. In her hands is a document, folded and sealed and wrapped in protective cloths. The document is older than most planets. The document bears a signature that was made by a hand that no longer moves. The document permits her to do almost anything, and she has spent her life learning which of those things are worth doing. She will sign the deal, or she will not. She will bring the cargo home, or she will not. The Imperium, for its part, will not know what she has decided for months or years, or perhaps ever. The warrant was given to her ancestors for precisely this purpose. To act on humanity's behalf in places where humanity itself cannot reach. That is what a rogue trader is. That is what the Warrant of Trade is. That is the strange, aristocratic, dangerous, indispensable institution that the Imperium of Man created in order to survive, and that has, across 10,000 years, served its original purpose better than most of the other institutions the Emperor left behind. The rogue traders are still out there. They will, I suspect, be out there long after the rest of us have forgotten to look. Sleep well. The Emperor protects, and so, in their own peculiar way, do the dynasties whose warrants he signed with his own hand. The one thing you can say for certain about any rogue trader is that they are, right now, somewhere, doing something. And whatever they are doing, it is almost certainly not something the rest of us were ever meant to see.